Okay, hello everyone. I thought I would just go over some of the older talks that I've created and put together in the past, and they weren't recorded, so I thought I would go back over some of those and share some of the knowledge and things provided for a bit of interest and a bit of fun, really. So today I'm going to be talking about how to hack the internet for fun and profit. And we're going to be talking a bit about Shodan. We're going to talk about scanning the internet. We're going to talk about finding vulnerabilities, exposed devices, adversary infrastructure, all sorts of fun and interesting stuff that if you've never used Shodan before, and here's some of the fun things you can use it for. Pretty, very introductory, entry level kind of talk this was. So this was for my 2600 group, Warm of 2600. I think I first gave this back in December 2022, but it still works today, right? So hacking the internet, what is hacking the internet? How do we research things? If someone tells you to find a specific device and how many companies use it, how do you do that? That's sort of what I'm going to be talking about today. How does Shodan work? What sort of ways are these devices exploited? And again, how these support all the rest of the sort of intrusion. Introduction to Shodan. How does Shodan work? So Shodan is a kind of a scanner that scans every device on the internet periodically. So if a new device is connected to the internet and it has a exposed port like port 80, which is HTTP, or port 3389, which is RDP, then when Shodan scans the whole internet, that newly connected device will appear. Um, all of those devices are then indexed into a database, which is then searchable for other researchers and things who are able to look for those specific devices. There's all sorts of queries that Shodan has, and you can actually look for every device that's exposed to the internet belonging to one company or belonging to one country. There's all sorts of different ways you can do this, and it's a very flexible, useful tool. And if you're already aware of this, you'll understand, right? Um, the thing to remember is that there's a lot of Internet of Things devices connected to the internet. So you've got industrial control systems, you've got CCTV cameras, you've got all sorts of devices that are placed remotely somewhere in some sort of facility or some sort of environment. And you can't really just go up and, cable those like a long cable connected to your device. You actually like your local corporate network, you kind of have to install these things and then connect to them over the internet in many cases. And people just forget to secure them. People make it so it's anyone in the whole world can view it. Whereas in reality, they should probably be using sort of allow listed IP addresses, some sort of IP address that can only connect to that system, not just any IP address, right? So when you're going through Shodan, you'll see all sorts of interesting uh, stuff that's exposed directly to the internet, just because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how these devices work by their owners. One of the most interesting queries I've found on Shodan is actually looking for authentication disabled on port 5900 and 5901, because this is VNC. So you can actually connect to any device with no password even, and people just set this up and expose it to the internet. Whilst doing that, actually going and doing that yourself would constitute a Computer Misuse Act because you don't have permission to do that. So I highly recommend not doing it. But it doesn't negate the fact that people still expose these things, and threat actors don't care about the Computer Misuse Act. They're still going to go and do it. So some of the really crazy stuff I found on Shodan in the past. One of them was this Code 42 software insider risk management software. So it's like data loss prevention and things software is already exposed to the internet. Not ideal because anyone can log in and access that. Really not ideal. But nonetheless, people also still do that. And we also have someone listening to Spotify as well, all sorts of crazy stuff you find. Um, well, that leads me on to my next topic of attackers actually using Shodan. So if you're a threat actor, and you're looking to infiltrate an enterprise network, one of the types of systems that you're likely to target is Fortinet VPNs or enterprise VPNs in general. SSL VPNs over the last 5, 10 years have been a real weak point for many organizations. And this is just another example of a VPN that anyone could pretty much compromise because this was a directory traversal bug. And if you know anything about, bugs and directory traversals, it's one of the worst kind. Because all you have to do is browse to that URL and you can get the admin's credentials. And then you can log in and then you can pivot laterally, move laterally through the enterprise network, kind of the worst type of bug you can really have in many ways. Um, and attackers can just find these things on Shodan. Because if you actually just go to Shodan, you type in product 40 net 40 gate, you'll see all of these things. And to make matters worse, Shodan actually tags things um, that are vulnerable to these vulnerabilities. So if you're a threat actor, when this vulnerability came out, all you had to do was scan the whole internet, or all you had to do was start on Shodan, get the previous scans of all of these devices, all of the IP addresses of these 130 plus thousand devices, and then just browse to the URL and you just start hoovering up credentials. You can log in, you can change the password, you can gain that persistence. It was really a kind of a nightmare scenario for many companies and has led to all sorts of advanced persistent threats, state-sponsored intrusions, as well as ransomware gangs, as well as malware botnets, and all sorts of threat actors were using this at the time back in 2018, 2019, 2020 even, because many companies, even when they patched this vulnerability, the threat actors still had the credentials, so they could still log back in. Still kind of a nightmare situation, but one of the many ways of how threat actors use Shodan. And just to kind of highlight how threat actors on the sort of cybercrime underground on some of these forums. So we've got raid forums back in the day, which is shut down now a couple of years ago. But you had all of these threat actors making posts saying that they found all of these Fortinet devices and things. So they were absolutely interested in these things. Uh, Again, we have the Iranian APT groups and you have the Russian-speaking ransomware gangs. All of these organizations were warning about it. The threat actors were trying to buy and access it. It was a real mad rush to try and fix these things. Um, but that sort of takes me on to the next topic, which is how you can actually find, as researchers, how you can find the attacker's infrastructure on Shodan. So one of my favorite queries is just the very simple one, http.html and in quotes stealer. And this would actually profiles all of the HTML pages that Shodan kind of indexes, all of the mentions of the keyword stealer. And this is interesting because you can find sort of C2 panels and advertisements of cybercrime campaigns and things of malware developers or people who have bought the malware and loaded it up on the server. And you can find all these kinds of interesting panels and C2 servers, and you've actually managed to uncover some adversaries this way. So on the screen here, I've got examples of Titan Stealer, Raxnet Bitcoin Stealer, Patriot Stealer. You see all different types of stealers as well. Um, and this is another interesting way you can use Shodan is you can actually look for sort of open directories on there as well that have been indexed. And this was an example, I think I used a query of some of the common tool names used by attackers. So we've got Sliver, we've got MSF4, which is Metasploit. We've got Chisel and all sorts of different offensive security tools, which you can just download from GitHub. but an attacker had deployed these on a web server, some sort of maybe a simple HTTP web server, exposed it to the internet, and then anyone can view those files that had been basically published to the internet. And Shodan indexes all of these, remember? So you can just search the keyword and you can find this stuff. Um, by browsing to one of the URLs, one of the publicly available URLs, you could actually see a screenshot of the attacker's system, which is all in Chinese. And you saw all sorts of crazy tools in there, a Chinese language version of Cobalt Strike, a Chinese offensive security tool called Power Ladon, Sliver, Metasploit, Chisel, Earthworm. Earthworm is like a Chinese language connection tunneling tool. So the adversary here was very much a Chinese speaking adversary, whether they were a cyber criminal or an APT group, we can't really tell. But that is definitely an interesting finding of adversary infrastructure. Another example of this was you can find threat actors using Burp Suite, Ghidra, Hashcat. This was very much like some sort of server or location that the adversary used to upload their tools and let others kind of download them or use them for any sort of campaign. Because I mean, Burp Suite, Ghidra, and Hashcat, or Ghidra and Hashcat particularly, are more like offline tools. Ghidra is a kind of a debugger and disassembler, and you can kind of reverse engineer software and things like that. And Hashcat is more of a password cracking tool. So you wouldn't really deploy those on a target system. You're kind of more likely to download things from a target system and then work on them offline or on another network, on your own network as an attacker. But other things like Burp Suite, Metasploit, ReconNG, VNC, these are more power exploit. These are the kinds of things that you would use against the target. So this was kind of an interesting finding because you had a whole real big mix of tools here. Um, and again, I mean, this takes me on to the next topic of you can actually find victims of threat actors already because interestingly enough, when something is exposed to the internet, you can see sort of defaced websites, you can see defaced servers, you can see servers which have had ransomware. It's been encrypted by ransomware. And the sort of ransom note is publicly facing on the sort of RDP login screen. So this is kind of an interesting way you can find companies or individuals that have already been hacked and things. So you had hacktivist groups from all sorts of different regions around the world, or just kind of script kiddies in a way, trying to gain a bit of respect on the underground and things. So if you just search http.html and then in quotes hacked by, then you can find all of these defaced servers, which is quite interesting. Because the interesting thing about it is they last quite a while. It's quite a long time before the owner kind of realizes it or knows how to remove it and things. So when I searched this, there's over 1,000 servers and things which had been compromised. And then the same for ransomware encrypting systems with RDP open that were still encrypted as 85 systems. So 85 organizations or people, had their systems encrypted and just kind of left it to be exposed to the internet. Whether they realized it was encrypted or not, I don't know. Um, Additional features of Shodan. So Shodan has, it's a very long running tool. It's been around a while. You can actually now get things like an entire country snapshot. So if you're a defender located in a specific country, say if you work for some sort of national computer emergency response team, or just interested in general as a researcher, you can look at sort of the top stats, top vulnerabilities, top ports open, or how many systems are exposed. Yeah, lots of interesting different things you can dig into. And just, all the research is kind of done for you, which is great. One of the most powerful features of Shodan is sort of a favicon searches. So when you go to like a login screen of some sort of appliance or application, you'll see like the little logo in the browser at the top there. That is actually like an icon, which is an image, and then that can be hashed and then you can actually search for all of the appliances exposed to the internet that have the same icon. And this is actually really useful because sometimes there's no keywords that you can search. So if you go to like if you try to search the HTML content, it's not available. There's no keyword, the brand or whatever isn't in the HTML, but the logo is still there. So this is actually a really interesting and useful way to use it as well. And then Shodan 2000 is just kind of a another interesting tool, another interesting feature of the platform. I recommend checking it out. So the key takeaways today is just to think about how does Shodan work? If does your organization how exposed is your organization to the internet? Can you find your organization's IP addresses and things on Shodan? Maybe it's worth checking it out. Do you have RDP left open? Do you have VNC with no authentication left open? Basic things, basic hygiene that you'll want to make sure that you're not doing, and so that you don't get victimized. Um, but if anything, just the fact that Shodan finds all of this stuff still highlights that security is hard and many people don't understand it. Many people just don't do it. And that's why we see so many ransomware attacks. That's why we see so much cybercrime and fraud, just because people don't understand how the systems work or how to configure them or set them up properly. Um, and the other interesting thing is to remember that even the attackers get things wrong. We found all their hacking tools. We found screenshots of the attackers' systems sitting publicly in a directory that anyone could access. So again, it's just another a funny fact of how the internet works. So I left some resources here as well. So we've got some Shodan queries. We've got some adversary infrastructure queries that I've sort of used myself to find adversary infrastructure. Posted on my GitHub, and then how to find adversary appliances, so VPNs and firewalls and load balancers, all this kind of stuff. Sometimes it's not quite so easy to find yourself, and it's useful just to have a list of queries of these things. And then I've also got a GIST there, which I use to track defacements and things. Uh, Last thing to mention is that Shodan only costs about a lot of these times you're going to need an account to run these queries, or you're only going to get a very, very limited amount of queries results, so maybe 1 or 2 pages. So I definitely recommend buying a Shodan account. I mean, it's not a sponsored video or anything, but it's just very, very helpful to have. And they usually do like an annual sale every year where a lifetime license is only £5 or $5, pretty cheap, pretty affordable. I have one. Some of my friends have, like all of my friends have one. So I definitely recommend looking out for that sale and grabbing yourself a license or maybe a couple of licenses and give some out to your friends as well. But I think that's it for today. I appreciate if you made it this far, and hopefully you can enjoy using Shodan.